Postbank is a crucial state-owned entity in South Africa established with the core mandate of promoting financial inclusion, particularly through social grant distribution. However, like many SOEs, it's faced its share of challenges over the years, and this week on Business Spotlight, Nikki and Mbengashe, the CEO of Postbank, joins me in the studio to discuss the institution's growth strategy. Nikki, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Well, you've been with Postbank for just over a year. What's that journey been like so far?
Well, it's actually almost 2 years now in July. It's been an interesting, challenging journey, as expected. I don't think I expected anything less, but also quite a fulfilling one as well, as I think anyone who joined or who joins Postbank has to be looking for or be driven by some purpose. So absolutely exciting and quite encouraging for the future.
Well, Postbank's recently been involved in a very big project on replacing cards, particularly for social grant customers. Mm-hmm. Can you perhaps remind viewers of the reasons behind this replacing of SASA gold cards and how it's gone?
Well, I think the main thing was, as all of us who banked with anyone else, every card has an expiry date, and there's a reason why banks have expiry dates on any card, because technology improves, and also just prevention of fraud, compliance capabilities on the card have to improve. So that was really the main reason. Our gold SASA card were due for replacement almost 3 years back, so we were behind in doing that. How it's going, I think out of the customers that we had to distribute to or swap their cards, 70% have actually managed to swap their cards. So those who are left, we are on a mission to restart that project again, to issue them the new Postbank Black Card.
Back to Postbank as a role in society. There are people who believe that there isn't a need for another bank in South Africa, but what are your thoughts on this?
It's always quite interesting when this conversation comes. I always say it's funny that when telcos are converting some of their businesses and opening banking, this question never arises. When some of the medical aid schemes open banks, this question was not necessarily asked. So perhaps people should ask, actually structuring the conversation or the question differently, because I don't think the question is whether South Africa needs another bank. There's absolutely a benefit for entry of every another bank in terms of South Africa. It's just good for the customer, for competition, because if then that was not the case, then all of us will be fully banked, and yet we know that that's still not the case. I think the question was whether, perhaps the question that people should be asking, do we need a state bank? And then that's a different conversation, which absolutely my answer unreservedly is a yes, strong yes. We need a state bank because the state bank has a different mission and mandate that's different to private sector. And by the way, state banks are not meant to compete with private sector. They're actually supposed to complement, supplement, and partner with state bank. But then the focus is totally different. Two examples I always give. State banks are supposed to at least to be a bit counter-cyclical in terms of how they lend versus banks. You know that banks, when the economy is under stress, then they close their taps. I think we saw it during COVID, that's not necessarily their best strategy always. I think there was a strain in terms of in COVID financially, and banks were forced to look at lending and extending credit differently. I think that's what a state bank, that's a gap that they will close. Another example for me will be state banks at least providing what I will call simpler terms, probably some guarantee. First loss guarantee, as we call it, so that if they need to extend to someone whom they regard risky, but who know that the person has potential and they can actually make a difference, as the state bank's mandate and our vision is, then at least we absorb some of that risk as a state bank to the benefit of the state, of course. So absolutely, South Africa does need a state bank. And I think we've seen examples in India in terms of how the impact of a state bank can have in the economy.
So Postbank's well positioned, and there's some excitement but also some caution in the corridors in thinking about how this will operate. And you've given some examples of areas where particularly a state bank versus a commercial bank can already be of value to particularly an area where a development society, where many people are still unbanked. But things like banking licenses and regulatory approval, it must be a minefield going through that. What's the process? Perhaps can you talk us through how the application, the license application for that's going, and so that and how that differs from the licensing that Postbank currently has?
I think firstly it's worth mentioning that we don't get any different treatment from the Reserve Bank because we're a state bank applying for a license. The same rigorous process is required of us. The same requirements in terms of capital adequacy absolutely required of us. And perhaps let's start with the licenses that we do have. So Postbank does have a license to issue cards because there are what I call your vertical license that you can still get on your journey to get a full commercial license, because we know financial services providers in terms of the products, but of course those vertical licenses have limitations before you can get the holistic horizontal commercial license. So we have a license to provide cards to operate within the payment system in South Africa. We are licensed to take deposits. In fact, that's the history of Postbank, being almost 100 years of a bank. It's a savings bank. It's always had the ability to take savings. In terms of our journey to the full commercial license, and by the way, we're about to also get our financial services provider license within, opens up the ability for us at least to do loans, probably insurance as well as a priority product that we want to step into as next phase of our strategy. As for the commercial license, there's two steps to it. There's the Section 13 and then of course the Section 16, which is the actual then commercial license. Postbank already has the Section 13, and the Section 13 just says you've almost probably halfway through this license application. And now we've given ourselves another 18 to 2 years to actually get the Section 16, which is a full commercial. Of course, one of the big requirements to obtain that is capital adequacy for the bank, which in simple terms means there is some capital you should at least keep as a bank, just in case all your customers one day walk in and want their money. And for us to be able to qualify that, we're going to need some capital injection into the business. So that's the biggest requirement for us to get to the Section 16 license.
Nikki, and then perhaps finally, there's lots of excitement, particularly from the unbanked and underbanked customer base, I'm sure. But are there plans to also look at government departments, perhaps municipalities, that will help to give you scale quite quickly if this happens?
Absolutely. And I think you got it completely, that it is one of the reasons we are targeting government. It is to give us scale. But also we believe that we can provide something that I think all South Africans are requiring. Government, I always say, does actually currently does a little bit of banking processes, because they do pay grants and they do provide some grants in terms of businesses, in terms of loans to businesses. But the processes in which to acquire that, for someone to access that, that's not easy. That's where the banking as a partner to government, the state bank particularly, can play in terms of providing that. I think the most important thing, the next one, in terms of fraud, ensuring that money lands with the right person, in terms of qualification of who actually does get that grant, that government, that's actually what a state bank can also do. And I think the third thing, the compliance thereof in terms of ensuring there's regulatory transparency in terms of how that process, therefore a bank is required to have processes that are auditable, and that there's controls that can be proven to be delivering what they promise to. And I think that's what a state bank, that's what Postbank can be to government, to integrate and ensure that the money that government gives to society, and I think the fourth thing, to ensure that there's return on that money so that it can help the next person. I think the examples of the NSFAS of these days in terms of what we've seen in the newspapers, in terms of how that money never gets to the right person, but also how many people who actually get that loan and actually pay it back, because there's processes in terms of when you lend and then the collection. And again, banks are structured to do that. And therefore, that's what we believe we can be to government. Absolutely.
Sounds like some interesting times ahead. We're going to have to leave it there. Nikki, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
That was Nikki Mbengashe, CEO of Postbank, giving an overview of what can be expected from the state-owned enterprise in the next few months and years coming up.